massive civil protest, not only against the government, but against the very foundations of a sectarian state. As it was in 2005, when the aim to force the withdrawal of the Syrian troops from the national soil united all the Lebanese, no matter what their sectarian affiliation was. A deep sense of social injustice has brought Shias, Sunnis, and Christians under the Lebanese flag, and under a unanimous claim, all means all politicians are equally corrupt. As we all know, the government decision to impose taxes on all online calling apps, what was known as the WhatsApp tax, was the spark that led to protest. But reasons behind the biggest popular movement in decades are much more critical and deeper. Despite being pictured for a long time as the former Switzerland in the Middle East, Lebanon today lacks the basic public services of a modern society: 24-hour electricity, access to drinking water, efficient garbage collection, clean and accessible public spaces, fair judiciary. And corruption rests on the shoulders of the poorest. As our speaker has written, unemployment among young people ran as high as 37%. Half of workers and more than a third of the country's farmers lives below the poverty line. And as a result of the Syrian crisis, some 200,000 additional Lebanese has been pushed into poverty in a country of 6 million people. But today's conference is focused mainly in what this protest against the sectarian elite could mean for Hezbollah, a movement that has portrayed itself as the party of the poor and marginalized, a movement against whom any criticism seemed impossible, or at least could be very dangerous, and probably the actor at the very antipodes of a free civil society. It's a pleasure to have with us Professor Joseph Dacher. He's a Swiss Syrian activist and scholar at the Political Science Department of the Université de Lausanne. He has a PhD in development students at the London University School of Oriental and African Studies, and is the author of the Hezbollah, the Political Economy of the Party of God, and Syria After the Uprisings, the Political Economy of State Resilience. And some of you, I'm sure, know him because of his blog, Syrian Freedom Forever. Thank you very much, Professor. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the IEMED for inviting me. Thank you all for being here tonight. Hopefully we'll have a good debate. So, as it's been mentioned, I'm going to speak about Hezbollah and its reaction towards the Lebanese protest movement that started mid-October 2019. To understand Hezbollah's reaction to the protest movement, that actually, surprisingly for me, but surprised a lot of journalists and academic, the opposition of Hezbollah initially to the protest movement. I think it's very important to come back to the roots of Hezbollah, its evolution, looking at how Hezbollah has been increasingly integrated in the sectarian neoliberal system in Lebanon, even though it still criticizes it in a very much, though I don't really like this term, in a populist way, criticizing it at some occasions. And this is what I will try to do, first by talking about coming back to the roots of the protest movement, then looking, historically speaking, to the integration of Hezbollah to the sectarian and neoliberal system in Lebanon, looking also at the evolution of its social base from the mid-80s to today, looking also at the role of Hezbollah played in the different uprisings of the region of the Middle East and North Africa since 2010, 2011, especially regarding Hezbollah, especially regarding Syria, because it did play a role also in the increasing differences among its popular base and the leadership of Hezbollah. And finally, looking at the attempts of structuration of the protest movement today in Lebanon and the way Hezbollah is trying to put an end to it through different tools and instruments, while having a conclusion regarding all these elements. So when we look at the roots of the protest movement, it was mentioned in introduction. It was following, the direct route is following the attempt to impose regressive tax on WhatsApp, which for people that know Lebanon, already telecommunications are very expensive. So imagining putting a new tax on WhatsApp was complete madness. And when we come back and seeing how a minister attempted to impose this regressive tax, it doesn't make any sense, to tell you honestly. But it was in the attempts of the conference that was called CEDAR Conference of new austerity measures in Lebanon against the possibility of attracting billions of dollars in Lebanon. It's kind of a new Paris 4. There have been 3 Paris conferences before, but as they all failed, they changed the name but kept the main city, Paris, organizing these conferences. Basically, it was a package. The Lebanese government had to implement austerity measures plus privatization policies, especially in telecom and energies, and they will get this package of loan, nearly 11 billions of dollars. 8.9 billions of euros, I think. I don't know exactly, but this is the thing. So it was a direct reaction to this, but the socio-economic crisis is much deeper, as it was again mentioned in Lebanon, and it's been ongoing since the beginning of the 90s. Basically, the political economy of Lebanon, following the Taif agreement, was a deepening of neoliberal policies in all aspects of Lebanese society. While a redistribution of resources and or different forms of the rent through warlords that continue to rule the country. And new actors were added to this. But the roots of the crisis is definitely since the 90s and the political economic framework that was imposed first by Rafiq al-Hariri and all the warlords that continued to rule the country with the support at the time until 2005 of the Syrian regime that occupied Lebanon until it withdrew from Lebanon in 2005 following the protest movement that was called the Cedar Revolution. But we can go back on it later on. So, and one of the main proof of the socio-economic roots of this protest movement is to see the massive protest throughout Lebanon. And this is one also the main characteristical difference with the previous protest movement in 2015. If you remember the You Stink movement that started out of an ecological, if you want, issue to challenging the sectarian movement, and the 2011 protest movement following the beginning of the uprisings in the region, which was the people want the end of the sectarian regime. This time, the protest is much more rooted in popular classes and in working classes than 2015, 2011, that was a bit more restricted, but without being completely restricted to the liberal middle class of Beirut. We see protests throughout Lebanon today, from the north of Tripoli to the south, Nabatiya and Sur, to the Bekaa as well, Baalbek and other cities. And when we see massive protests in Tripoli, it's very interesting because Tripoli is the most impoverished, and its surroundings are the most impoverished areas of Syria, of Lebanon, sorry. And we've seen important protests, and it's also it took a particular character in Tripoli, because Tripoli was accused of being the Kandahar of Lebanon. Well, it's not only a socio-economic way of disdaining Lebanon, or Tripoli, sorry, but it's also very racist against the Afghan people to say basically it's the Kandahar of Lebanon. And Tripoli became a center of rebellion and turned into a very vivid center of protest. Every night there was a DJ. The main square of the city was turned into what we call the Carnival of the Revolution, with a DJ coming in. Very important protest movement that is ongoing until now. And as I said, Tripoli was the center of injustice. It never witnessed any kind of important development project since the beginning of the 90s. The most important reason for this was that Rafiq al-Hariri was trying to marginalize the political class elite of Tripoli in this perspective. And it suffered massively also from the Syrian prisons until 2005 with harsh repression on different occasions. So there's really, first of all, this socio-economic aspect of the protest movement that cannot be put aside. Coming with this is the link that is made with the challenge to the sectarian system. The sectarian system and the neoliberal policies are interlinked. And this is very important. And this has been analyzed even from prior the 90s, notably by an author that I mention a lot in my article, in my book. I'm very fan of it, who was called the Arab Gramsci, Mehdi Amel, from his pen name, who put forward this link between the economic framework of the country and the sectarian system. And the protesters have been very much understanding this by challenging also the sectarian system. Saying that they want another political model, criticizing the sectarian system, how all these sectarian leaders are basically controlling the wealth of the city, of the country, controlling the wealth of the country and distributing resources to their own supporters. And the way sectarianism was challenged was by the shows of signs of solidarity from below, from different areas of Lebanon. For example, seeing signs of solidarity from Tripoli, very much majority Sunni area, to, for example, Shia majority inhabited areas of Lebanon, such as Nabati and Sur. But also seeing, protesters going from Tripoli, going to Keserwan, which is a very heavy Maronite inhabited area, to show signs of solidarity, protesters going from particular areas to others to show signs of solidarity. Also, a symbol of this was two neighborhoods of Tripoli coming together. One is majority inhabited by Alawis, the other is Sunni. They've been fighting each other for the past 15 years. At the beginning of the protest movement, they came together and started protesting together. So breaking the sectarianism that the ruling class have been using to divide the people, and are still using it until today. And I will come back to it in various statements and declarations made by different political parties trying to divide the protest movement according to sectarian ideals. So the roots of the protest movement, I will resume it in two words: neoliberalism and sectarianism, which is interlinked, and we can come back to it into conclusion. In this perspective, why is Hezbollah opposing it? Basically, Hezbollah has historically, and until today, in its discourse, criticized neoliberal policies to some extent, or at least in its manifesto, the second one of 2009, it criticized the salvage capitalism. The savagery of capitalism, some of the policies of the US, but in a very, in a way that is not very clear at the same time. But it does have sometimes criticism of these economic policies. Now we can see it's also using the movement that is very strong against the banks in Lebanon also to try to co-opt some sections of the protest movement. I'll come back to this in the last part of the structuration of the protest movement. And sectarianism, historically speaking, in the first manifesto, the open letter that established officially the political party of Hezbollah in 1985, it criticized the sectarian system dominated by the Maronite. Obviously, it was not to having an alternative that is more progressive, democratic. Until today, Hezbollah, even though it accepts and defends the sectarian system, says that its preferred political system is an Islamic state. And this has not changed. Until recently, you had Naim Qasim, who's the number 2 of Hezbollah, saying we would rather prefer to live in an Islamic state, but because of the demography of Lebanon, this is impossible. And we will not impose it on the people. But because they know even among their popular base, this is not very attractive, we'll say, to have an Islamic state in Lebanon. So, but rhetorically speaking, those two aspects were always a bit criticized by Hezbollah, neoliberalism and sectarianism. But in its practice, Hezbollah has actually supported these two aspects of Lebanon and became one of the main supporter and defendant today of this system, this political system. Without Hezbollah's positioning today of supporting the neoliberal sectarian system in Lebanon, it would be very hard for the rest of the ruling class in Lebanon to protect this system. And why is this so? And this is where I come back, just to finish on this. The first reaction of Hezbollah against the protest movement were very violent. It moderated after, through times. But the first speech of Hassan Nasrallah a couple of days after the beginning, a week later, after the beginning of the protest movement, was very harsh, accusing the protest movement of being controlled by foreign embassies, by foreign actors, trying to destroy and to bring chaos to the country, and saying basically, even though there were honest demands, this was a protest movement controlled from outside. And this is not necessarily something new in the history of Hezbollah. Already in 2015, in the You Stink movement, it challenged the leadership of this. Basically, it said, we don't know the leadership of this movement. It might be controlled by foreign embassies, so we don't want to be involved in it. And saying basically the most important issue today for Lebanon is struggling against the Zionist state and Daesh. Always bringing back to foreign issues. But even in 2011, at the beginning of the protest movement in Lebanon against the sectarian system, their members were not part of it. And on the opposite, according to interviews I made at the time, they rather said to their members to stay away from this kind of protest movement. And I'll come back to it because it's something very particular to Hezbollah to not see its members or its popular base being part of trans-sectarian popular movement, whether on social issues or political issues. So, again, we have to understand the positioning of Hezbollah by looking to the evolution of the political party. Hezbollah has increasingly been integrated to the Lebanese sectarian system, first of all by accepting the Ta'if agreement in 1990, even though it was critical of it. It wasn't any more challenging directly the sectarian system. Even now, when it criticizes the sectarian movement, it says basically we need a process of 20, 30 years before finding a new solution. And they're obviously opposed to a solution that would be a secular or even a civil state. Completely opposed. They've been one of the main actors opposing even the implementation of a facultative civil wedding. Saying this was, one of its deputies was saying basically, you want to infuse atheist model in our society, which has to be completely refused. And they're against any kind of secular ideas, and this is not particular to Hezbollah, any kind of religious fundamentalist movement throughout the world you can see are opposed to any kind of secular society or secular state. And first they accepted to participate in the electoral parliament elections in '92 and started to participate in all governments of Lebanon since 2005 after the withdrawal of the Syrian army of Lebanon. So and this was linked also to, I speak about the socio-economic evolution within the Hezbollah, but also to elements pertaining to its main foreign supporters. In Iran, first of all, historically speaking, Hezbollah is the best success of Iran when it comes to the export of the Islamic revolution to the Middle East. It was in the 80s, it was the policies following the establishment of the Islamic Republic of Iran to export the revolution to the Middle East. And Hezbollah was one of the reasons of the creation of Hezbollah, among others, was the willingness of the leadership of the Islamic Republic of Iran to export its model. So Hezbollah until today is in many aspects following the ideological strain of the Khomeinism. And until today it follows the Wilayat al-Faqih, meaning that theory of the jurisconsult, that its main, if you want, ideological axis is the Wilayat al-Faqih, so Ali Khamenei in Iran. Following the death of Khomeini in the end of the 80s, following the end of the Iraqi-Iran war, it was the end of the policy to export the Islamic revolution and seeking better relations with its neighbors and also countries at the international scene. European Union, Russia, even to some extent, even though it seems a bit weird today, especially with the political tensions, with the US. And there's a couple of examples where the US and Iran collaborated in 91 with the first Iraqi war, but in Afghanistan in 2001, 2003, following the Iraqi-British-led invasion. So it wanted better relation. And it supported the integration of Hezbollah in the Lebanese sectarian system, though there was a change. And it was also came through the arrival of a new leadership, Khamenei and Rafsanjani at the time. This was one aspect. But the second aspect was also the role of Syria, pushing Hezbollah's integration in the Lebanese sectarian system. And there was a change, we can come back to this, during the time of Hafez al-Assad in power, Hezbollah was always a tool in Syrian foreign policy, in the negotiation with Israel to pressure Israel, etc. With Bashar al-Assad, there was a turn. It wasn't anymore a tactical relation. It became a strategic relation, and I will come back to this, especially when we see the role of Hezbollah in the Syrian uprising. And Syria pushed Hezbollah integration in the sectarian Lebanese system. Plus, in the Ta'if agreement, under the pressure of Syria, Hezbollah was able to maintain its weapons, which the rest of the political parties, on a massive scale, even though they still have, were not. So these are the elements that, or you can understand the integration of Hezbollah. The last element I want to mention is the evolution among the social basis of Hezbollah. Historically speaking, Hezbollah in the mid-80s was born among Shia clerics, the small bourgeoisie, the popular classes, the peasant of Shia Lebanese popular classes, if you want. But from the 90s, and especially when it took control of Dahi, which is Beirut's southern suburbs, which is the main concentration of Shia in Lebanon, it took control over Harakat Amal, which is the other historical Lebanese Shia political parties in internal strife. Again, it looks weird when talking about this now. They've been allied since in the 90s, first through the pressure of the Syrian regime, after because of political interest. But in the end of the 90s, there were huge military confrontation between Hezbollah and Harakat Amal. They took over this area, which was full of resources also, and you didn't have only Shia popular classes. And this comes also through, there's transformation within also the Shia population of Lebanon. And this was occurring even prior to the civil war. Historically speaking, obviously, at the independence of Lebanon in 1946, in its vast majority, the Shia was the most impoverished community in Lebanon, although there were differences existed. It's not, and this is very important, I put forward this in the book, one of the mistakes of some academics until now, or not political also analysis, was to see classes equal communities before the war. And this was also actually brought forward by leftist thinkers in Lebanon, saying basically the Shia are the popular classes, the Sunni are the middle classes, and the Christians are the bourgeoisie. which was wrong before the war and is much more wrong today. Today there's much more of equality among the ruling classes, among the different fractions of the sectarian elites, between Christian Maronite, between Shias and Sunnis. There's been a redistribution. But this was occurring already before the Lebanese civil war. And actually the rise of Harakat Amal under Musa Sadr was this reflection of a middle class, of a Shia bourgeoisie growing in Lebanon through its link with the diaspora and etc. At the beginning of the 90s and in the past 2 decades, they've been increasingly, as Hezbollah became the most important Shia political force in Lebanon, higher middle class, Shia middle class, and bourgeoisie, fractions of the Shia bourgeoisie, and in the diaspora entered the political parties. And we can see this also through the profile, the background of its cadres and deputies in parliament. They're not anymore, from the lowest stratas of the society. They've been in the best schools. They've been in the best universities of Lebanon. They're very often issued from the higher middle class or from liberal professions. You've seen increasingly Hezbollah having a growing importance in all the professional associations of Lebanon. Engineers, dentists, doctors, lawyers, even though lawyers are still controlled majority by Harakat Amal because of its presence in the Lebanese university. But increasingly, and you've seen also research showing this, that Hezbollah's popular classes is not only among the lowest strata of the society, it is among the higher middle class and the Shia fraction of the bourgeoisie, because it became the most important Shia political party, and therefore also distributing resources for its own channels. And you've seen also, and I look at this in the book, they've invested in particular economic sectors, especially real estate. But this, again, is not particular to Hezbollah. And it's important when I talk about Hezbollah's role regarding sectarianism and neoliberalism to not forget that the rest of the ruling class in Lebanon have similar characteristic or features. But the discussion today is about the role of Hezbollah. So for example, I show how increasingly cadres of Hezbollah were invested in real estate companies, also in trade, also through links with the diaspora. And it's not a surprise to see today Hezbollah being more critical than other sectors of, if you want, the Lebanese elite of the banks, is where the Shia community has the lowest weight. Among the Alpha Bank, which is the biggest, the 15 or 14 biggest banks in Lebanon, only 2 or 3 are owned by the Shia fraction of the bourgeoisie. Mostly are still in the hands of Christian Maronite fraction of the bourgeoisie or Sunni fraction of the bourgeoisie. So it's not a surprise also to see Hezbollah being more critical, especially after the sanctions imposed by the US that were very much implemented by the Lebanese banks and the central bank by Riyad Salameh. So this evolution of the social base also means that a lot of people that you can cross among Hezbollah are not willing, if you want, to live in an Islamic republic, but very happy with the sectarian system, but just wanting a better place in this sectarian system. And I will come back to this in conclusion. The Hezbollah is not challenging the Lebanese sectarian system, but wanting a better place within it. And you have historical examples in Lebanon, which is the same, among other factions of the Islamic bourgeoisie, if you want. So these elements explain the increasing integration of Hezbollah in the Lebanese neoliberal system. And this also increasingly pushed Hezbollah to support neoliberal policies and privatization policies in Lebanon. For example, since 2005, they had ministers in government not challenging the policies that were implemented and now criticized by Hariri and other Prime Minister Najib Mikati. On the opposite, it supported it. And one of the examples is that one of its ministers, Mohammed Fneish, was Minister of Electricity and Energy in 2005-2006, supported the privatization of the Electricité du Liban, and said even that all sectors that have a commercial component in Lebanon should be privatized, saying that the private sector is doing a much better role than the public sector. when it was in charge of the agricultural ministry or the industrial ministry, it did not change any kind of dynamics in these sectors. Agriculture has been, its role in the Lebanese economy has been diminishing since the 90s. And actually, when I was interviewing, trade unionists in the agricultural sector, they say, I didn't see the difference when a Hezbollah minister was in place or another minister. On the opposite, what it did, it was supporting its own trade unions against the independent ones. Same when it comes to the industry, it didn't support what we call the productive sectors of the economy, which is industry and agriculture. The Lebanese economy is very much dominated, and this has been deepened following the Lebanese civil war, by the service rentier economy. And this has been the case since the 90s, but even prior. But industry and agriculture was a bit more important prior to the civil war, although diminishing since the independence of the country. By which is again not particular to Lebanon. Throughout the region of the Middle East and North Africa, productive sectors of the economy have been diminishing since the 70s, with the policies, for example, in Egypt of so-called infitah, liberalization, but or what we call also structural adjustment, which is a nice way of saying austerity measures, privatization of various sectors of the society, etc. So it supported these policies, which today is criticizing rhetorically. And actually, at the beginning of the protest movement, it supported, Saad Hariri, which is the symbol of these policies, coming back as a role of prime minister and saying, we want him to implement the demands of the CEDAW conference that I explained in the beginning. So there was an integration of Hezbollah in all aspects in the sectarian and neoliberal system of Lebanon. So it was not different from the rest of the political sectarian elite of Lebanon. In addition to this, it played also a similar role in destroying the labor movement in Lebanon. I have a chapter on this in the book. With other sectarian actors of Lebanon, it destroyed the independent trade unions that were playing a role to defend the public sector, being against austerity measures, and privatization of the economy. Since the 90s, first it was attacking the main general trade union federation, CGTL, Confédération Générale des Travailleurs Libanais, by co-opting it, and it co-opted it completely in the 2000s. But again, with a new movement between 2011 and 2014, union coordination committees, which is basically not recognized officially as a trade union because in Lebanon it is forbidden for public officials, workers working in state institutions to establish a trade union. So it's registered among the Ministry of Culture. And but they organized in 2011, 2014, there was very important protest movement among workers for better salaries, etc. Salaries have been kept the same since 96 to 2011 officially, while inflation grew of more than 120%. So the purchasing power of Lebanese have lost humongously. And again, all the sectarian parties, despite the differences, united to destroy this movement. And the head of this, the Union Coordination Committee of the public school teachers, who was Hana Gharib, who became the head of the Lebanese Communist Party, was kicked out of his position. And they did this with other independent trade unions. And Hezbollah did play a role, and actually criticized him for creating a class consciousness among its members, which was seen obviously as bad, creating fitna, division, which is, again, if you see the role, and it's really interesting to do some comparison with how the sectors of the Humanists took over in the Iranian Revolution over other sectors of the society, was also taking over trade unions that were independent, that tried to organize during the Iranian Popular Revolution. So this evolution shows you that Hezbollah is not anymore the similar party that in the 80s, even a deputy, Ali Fayyad, who was, I met him when he was in charge of the Hezbollah think tank center, a research center, saying, we're not anymore a poor party, we have rich people, and he was proud of it. We have rich party, we rich people in the party, the businessmen, important people, and we have a weight in this society that has to be taken into account. Another aspect also interesting to see is that not only it is preserving the sectarian and neoliberal system in Lebanon, but also the way it saw the popular uprising that started in 2010, 2011. So one thing to remember is that prior to 2011, when Hezbollah was asked about the nature of the regimes that were supporting it, or that it was opposed to a monarchy, authoritarian regime, what should be done? They said, this is not the important issue today. We have no problem whether with monarchies or authoritarian regime. The main issue is Palestine. And if people would rebel against their own regime instead of fighting for Palestine, it's a mistake. So this was the position of the number 2, Naim Qasim, explained in his book in 2008 regarding the regimes of the region. When the uprising started in 2011, what was interesting is that the Iranian regime and Hezbollah presented this uprising as a continuation, so they changed their position. They said, this is an Islamic awakening, a continuation of the Islamic revolution of '79. So they were very happy when it started in Tunis, when it started in Egypt, because they were allied basically of the US. Ben Ali, Mubarak, so they saluted this movement. And actually, in a speech in mid-March 2011, Hassan Nasrallah criticized people portraying this movement as conspiracies, as controlled by foreign actors. Few months later, his discourse completely changed following the beginning of the uprising in Syria. And I'll not come back into details, but it played a humongous role in supporting militarily and politically the Syrian regime to crush the Syrian uprising. But it was interesting to see the change of discourse. Increasingly, Syrian uprising being presented as a conspiracy controlled by the US, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey, Daesh, Zionists, everything together. A big soap with everything in it. And even it saluted the coming back of Egypt on the regional scene when Sisi came to power in Egypt, following the military coup d'etat. And more recently, is if you see the reaction of Hezbollah towards the protest movement in Iraq and in Iranian, it is mostly perceived, just as like the Iranian leadership, as a foreign plot against the so-called axis of resistance. So it's also refusing, change in the region from below. So it's not only, and very often foreign policies is the continuation of your own politics within your country. So this is interesting to see. Now when it comes to the protest movement, so this, you see the evolution of Hezbollah. And it's really, and this is how you understand the way today Hezbollah is reacting to this protest movement, which is basically challenging the pillars of the system in which it became its main defender, a main pillar of it, the sectarian neoliberal system. And this protest movement is a challenge to it. And historically speaking, every movement that started from below, that is trans-sectarian, that want a secular state or social issues, trans-sectarian, challenging the sectarian system, has been opposed by Hezbollah, or at least not supported. Today, the movement is facing various challenges, and if you've seen and followed the events since mid-October, the repression has been increasing, especially with the formation of the new government in mid-December 2019, that is supported by Hezbollah and other political parties such as the Free Patriotic Movement and Harakat Amal. There are attempts to structure the movement, and already the movement has won several issues, notably in some professional association. For example, in the Lawyers Professional Association, an independent has been voted as president and has done some job to defend the protesters against repression. In other Lebanese professional associations as well, we've seen new members, independents, challenging the whole Lebanese sectarian ruling class, their position in these positions. Prior to the establishment of the new government, there were attempts to impose another minister, Prime Minister Mohamed Safadi. Also with protesters going back in the streets, he resigned without being in position. He said, I'm not coming finally. There've been also a radicalization of the protest movement in many aspects, targeting symbols of corruption, of wealth, of land grabbing, privatization, and obviously one of the main targets have been the Lebanese central bank and the role of the banks since the beginning of the protest movement, and their policies and their role in the economic crisis. We can go back into details if you want in the debate regarding the role of the Lebanese protest movement. What was the reaction since then of Hezbollah? As I told you, first reaction was very harsh. After it moderated its speeches, saying indeed there were general demands that were honest, that had to be listened to it. Yes, indeed there is corruption in Lebanon. But every time Hezbollah said a solution must be found within the Lebanese sectarian and neoliberal system, supporting the fact that the president must stay Michel Aoun, who is a close ally of the party. Also supporting a technocratic political government. It refused completely, even though myself I was not in favor, but sectors of the protesters demanded a technocratic government. It refused it completely. The current government is technocratic political, meaning that even the technocrats have political affiliations. Even though they don't claim it, they try to hide it. It's very well known, and actually pictures of various ministers came out after they were nominated, showing them, having a meal with this Zaim, meaning a political leader, and others, or wearing a particular T-shirt of a particular party, etc. But also Hezbollah, not only having a rhetoric speech against the protesters, have used intimidations, violence tactics. Since mid-October, they've been attacking protesters in various areas of Lebanon, especially some areas of Beirut, but also Al-Bekaa, Baalbek, cities of Baalbek, and Nabatieh, and in Sur. Hezbollah and the people of Harakat Amal have attacked the protesters violently. Also, intimidation tactics going in Dahi, Hezbollah people, saying we have information on these people, showing they know that they've been participating in the protest. Showing as a way to saying we know what you're doing, and saying you could be threatened in different ways, losing your job, etc. Obviously, the medias of Hezbollah have been portraying the movement in a very negative ways, following the discourse of Hassan Nasrallah, its Secretary General. Also using sectarianism. Some of the protesters, Amal and Hezbollah supporters, came a few times, whether in Beirut city center, where protesters were gathering, or in different areas of the south, shouting Shia, 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 meaning Shiite, saying we are the true representative of the Shia, and your movement is against the Shia, challenging Hezbollah, but also more generally the weapons, you're part of a foreign movement, a foreign conspiracy, etc. Also mentioning we want a new 7th of May, meaning 7th of May 2008, where sectors of Beirut, western Beirut, were taken over by Hezbollah and its allies in a military fashion. So clearly attempting to threatening the other protesters. One anecdote to this, what is very funny, is in a southern city close, in a small city in the southern of Lebanon. So Hezbollah and Amal supporters came out shouting Shia, 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 and the other side were Shia as well. So they said, we are also Shias. So they didn't know what to say. After they learned they were leftists. So they started shouting, Che Guevara is a robber, is a liar, Che Guevara is a liar, etc. So you can see that even the attempts of sectarianism did not work until today. And actually, signs of solidarity are continuing between cities. Very lately, there was a a protester that is from Tripoli that came to protest in the Kesselwan in a Maronite-dominated city. They went to protest against what they do more and more is to follow politicians in Lebanon in restaurants or theater and asking them to leave. This happened on different occasions. Lately, it was against the Free Patriotic Movement deputy. And seeing protesters coming in front of the restaurant, he called his own bodyguards, security services, big man, to challenge them. And one of his bodyguards, a couple of his bodyguards, find one of the activists and ask him where he was, and saying he was from Tripoli, and saying, "How dare you come to our region? You're a foreigner," etc. With also some not only regional aspect but sectarian aspect of it. And he was very much violently attacked, etc. The day after, there was signs of solidarity from activists from this region. He was acclaimed, brought with the protesters, etc., showing solidarity. You're one of us, Tripoli, and our city is the same. So it's continuing despite of it. And there's attempts of structuring the movement. There's been new trade unions made. And what is interesting to see is that some of the protesters are learning from other experiences of other uprisings. So, for example, there's an attempt to establish, and it was established and it's growing, a professional gathering of Lebanese on the model of the Sudanese professional gathering various professions, teachers, university teachers, in culture, engineers, doctors, etc. They've also been they created it a new journalist trade union association, because the official one is completely co-opted by the various ruling sectarian political parties. So the attempts to create new trade union, putting forward the socio-economic demand of the protesters and challenging as well the sectarianism of the system and of the political parties. There have been various gatherings of political parties from leftist background, secular background, liberal background, such as the campaign, if you remember, of 2016 that turned into a political party which is called Beirut Madinati. They came together on various occasions, proposing various attempts to come out from the socio-economic crisis of a transitional route to leave a sectarian system and to try to establish a secular system with socio-economic policies in favor of the vast majority of the Lebanese people. There have been also attempts to organize on level of neighborhoods. So you have what is called the communes of the 17th of October, trying in each neighborhood to organize through blocking the roads, through organizing protesters, etc. So there's attempts at different levels to try to structure the protest movement. This does not mean that the uprising will succeed and everything. I was saying just before, what we've learned in the past decade is that to be very careful, that there are huge challenges until today for the Lebanese protesters, and that all the sectarian political parties still have capacities to mobilize their own political parties. They still have the resources to distribute, for example, work, to distribute charity services, etc. And in particular, Hezbollah is very strong at it. Hezbollah is, in many aspects, after the Lebanon, one of the biggest employer of Lebanon. If you take into account its civil and its military aspects, you are between 80,000 to 100,000 employees. If you consider that each one of them have a family, well, it's 3 to 5% per family, it's 500,000 of people. And they still have the capacity to mobilize on different occasions. What is interesting to see is that the increasing people within its own popular bases have been critical of Hezbollah. And this is not only, and today it's much more, we can see it, but this has been ongoing since 2016. First of all, in the municipal elections, people saying we are with the resistance, but the way Hezbollah manages our cities, neighborhood, and region is the same as the rest of the, there's no socio-economic development, patronage networks, they're favoring particular entrepreneurs that have link with the political parties. And actually ministers were challenged directly since 2016. There was very often videos coming out from conferences, a minister or deputy speaking with local population of a particular neighborhood, village, or region, and people challenging them, saying, you become like the rest. And now we're seeing increasingly this appearing. Similarly, there have been anonymous criticism from soldiers themselves of Hezbollah, and it's obviously understanding that they do it in an anonymous way because they're directly linked to the party and not in the networks of people close to the party. So, in conclusion, what I would say is that the protest movement is still sustaining despite the various attempts to put an end to it, including from Hezbollah, as I said, through speeches of Hassan Nasrallah that count a lot, that still have a lot of charisma, of followers, a popular base that it can mobilize, through intimidation, through physical attacks on protesters, through its medias, through institutional attempts to tear down the movement by the establishment of a new government that is continuing the policies of the precedent governments, but also by letting the socio-economic crisis deepen. Since the beginning of the protest movement, around 200,000 people has lost their jobs or see their salaries diminished consequently, deeply. At the same time, the Lebanese pound has lost more than 25 to 30% of its value. Now before the uprising, it was 1,500 lira for a dollar. Now it's 2,000, a bit more than 2,000. People are not allowed to withdraw more than $200 to $300 per week. And I guess a lot of people may know Beirut. Beirut is a very expensive city, very expensive city. So this is creating huge difficulties. Challenges of structuring the movement are still very much present, while capacities of sectarian movement, especially Hezbollah, are still present. While we have to take into account also the fact that you have tensions on a geopolitical side is not helping the protesters, whether in Lebanon, but more especially in Iraq. Sections of the people ruling these two states are using these geopolitical tensions, saying, listen, we have very important foreign policy issues to deal with. We cannot deal with internal issues. Or to try to deviate the movement, saying basically our struggle is only against the US. This is particularly the case in Iraq, a bit less in Lebanon, even though there have been attempts of Hezbollah to direct this, saying basically the socio-economic crisis is the sanctions, is the US, and US is preventing investments from Russia, from China in Lebanon, which is not at all the case. And this economic explanation of Hassan Nasrallah did not at all convince a lot of people. But it's things to take into consideration and that are being instrumentalized to try to deviate the movement on foreign political issues, but has not been working until now, I would say, in Lebanon. So the protest movement has facing a lot of challenges, and without the provision of a political, inclusive, and social alternative to the vast majority of the Lebanese people, it will be very hard, especially in the case of Hezbollah, of the popular basis of Hezbollah leaving the movement without the presence of this alternative. So protest movement is continuing, but without this political alternative to provide people to seek something else, it's very difficult. And it's also understandable on many aspects. Hezbollah and Amal are very important actors. In the sectarian system, basically, you distribute resources according very often to your sect, to your source, or to your loyalty to the political party. And if you lose this support from this political party, you might lose your job, you might lose the social assistance you get from the private charity of Hezbollah, for example, etc. And this is something to take into account. And again, this is not only a challenge for Lebanon, providing a political alternative, it's a challenge been ongoing for the past decade for the whole region. And this is why it is interesting to see people learning from foreign experiences, especially Sudan and Tunis, which, and I'll finish on this, there's two aspects why the situation is less worse, let's say, not to say better, less worse in these two countries. There's two strong pillars: a workers' movement that is organized and massive, and a feminist movement that is organized and massive in both countries, pushing forward democratic and social demands. Hopefully, we'll see the advent of this in Lebanon, but facing huge challenges from its ruling sectarian political classes, and which is supported by various regional and international power. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Daher. I think it has been a really deep and enlightening masterclass. We have learned a lot. And I think it's the time for our audience to share with us